Today we've got an interesting episode, a little bit on the fly, but I wanted to bring in James Harrigan. He's back. He's with us again. He's an expert on political philosophy and international relations, having done a tour of duty as an academic in Iraq during the Iraq War. And on top of that, there's so much going on in the world. Our audience knows that Underthrow is about peaceful means of underthrowing power, peaceful means of transferring power away from the powerful to the people. But this is different. What's going on in the world today is overthrow. But there's two different kinds of overthrow. There's endogenous overthrow and exogenous overthrow. And both are happening right now. Let's start. James, welcome. There seems to be a little bit of a media blackout here in the West on the subject of Iran, but they are so close. They are a hair's breadth close to returning the Shah, Reza Pahlavi, I think is his name, into some sort of constitutional monarchy, and the people on the street are chanting death to the dictators. This is getting serious. They've taken over Tehran today. They've taken over other cities. This is clearly either, it could be CIA, Mossad assisted, but definitely a popular uprising. What do you think about what's going on, and is it going to work? Is it going to take?
That's always the question, isn't it? I mean, it's interesting what's going on in Iran right now. And when I lived in Iraq, which would have been 2010, 2011, that's when I was most in tune with things Iranian. And the thing that I came to realize then is that Iran still is to a point, but was a very young country, demographically speaking. As such, the young people weren't terribly interested in a theocratic regime. What were they interested in? They wanted things like cell phones and Western entertainment, all the things that young people around the world want. Now, I said at the time that Iran would prove in the long run not to be an enemy of the United States, that it would come to be an ally, and probably a pretty staunch one. What has happened in the time from then to now, though, is interesting. Iran has gotten older, not younger. So right now, the median age in Iran is 32 to 34. And we've got a span of years there because, let's face it, data coming out of Iran, not exactly reliable. All of Iran as a whole, and that group specifically, the 40-year-old and down, not terribly religious, come to find out. The best data we've got says that about 40% of the Iranian population is religious, quote unquote.
Is that religious in terms of Islam?
Islam is the only game in town there. Everything else is a rounding error. So are they religious? Well, I mean, compared to the United States, yes, very much so. Compared to what the theocrats would say publicly, no, not at all. And I think if anything is going to be their undoing, it's that, right? Because that glue that could hold a nation together doesn't exist. And what's happened, for those people who haven't bothered to keep up on it, which I think is just about everybody, and with good reason, their currency has been devalued. It's lost about half its value very recently. And, when your currency is inflated to that sort of degree, bad things are going to happen. And we're going to end up talking about the exact same thing in Venezuela. But more often than not, when regimes fail, it's because people can't get things like food.
Yeah.
Right. That's really the hammer on the nail. It's not because you're worshiping improperly. Right. It's generally because you can't get the things that you need to live what you think to be a fully human life. And the Iranians right now are not living what they think to be our fully human lives. So can this work long term? I think maybe it can.
Yeah, this one seems different to me. Now, I have to say, I've been watching only dissident media. So, for example, there's a young Canadian-Iranian woman named Goldie who's very good on the issue. A fellow named Tusi, Tousi, Tusi TV. I've been watching the dissidents in Iran talk about this, or they're not in Iran. They're getting messages, getting videos from Iran, so that there is this dynamic, this interplay between independent media on the one hand and people in Iran with cell phone cameras. Basically, is what's going on.
Right.
And what I've found is, I think it's largely accurate. But by the time the West started reporting that this was an economic matter, that the currency had been devalued, and that the most of the protests were originating with the small merchants in the bazaars, because there's a whole network of bazaars in Iran, which is like sort of like the central shopping district that's lasted for centuries. It's an institution there, as you well know, and it sort of it burned out from there. But that it became a replace the dictators and let's have a parliamentary or constitutional monarchy by restoring the power of the Shah and having a parliament to go with him, the purported successor would be a man. They they are looking for something that is kind of a checks and balances democracy that's largely secular. Doesn't mean that they necessarily want to discard their religion. They just want to have a modern republic that where religion is private, and all of these messages are starting to get out, but they kind of are blacking out in the Western media. Why doesn't the Western media care about what's looking like going to be something that is as or more important than 1979 for Iran?
I don't think the Western media really understands anything about the Middle East, or Persia in this case, right? It's not in their wheelhouse. They understand it through Western eyes, and the categories that we tend to have in the West don't exactly filter onto that part of the world. And I would caution people in this way. Yeah, we all know that state-run media out of anywhere is probably not going to give you a full, rich story.
Mm.
Nor will dissident media, right? Dissident media is inclined to push its own agenda, and the agenda of dissident media is regime change, right? So everybody's got skin in the game. They're all pushing for what they want, and they're all lying to one degree or another. What we're going to have to do is sit back, wait and see if the demonstrations have legs. The Ayatollah has already said he's not going anywhere. So he's either not going anywhere or he's going to end up dead. And whichever of those two things happens, we'll let you know exactly where we are in Iran.
Right, right. I had this similar conversation with my wife the other day. I sort of said, look, I'm getting a bunch of dissident media. It's either Iranians who are no longer in Iran because they left with their families in 79 or since then. There have been other occasions where people could get out, but basically they're biased. So they're really revving this up and making this seem like it's going to be a thing. Whereas in the Western media, they're just like, more protests in Iran. Look, find the story on page 7 or what have you, right? It's just not been central to the media narrative, which has been completely overblown by other events, particularly that in Venezuela lately. But
think of it this way, Max.
The
we
Israelis
bombed
have been
Iran.
covering it. Yeah,
we bombed Iran, and that was a 2-day story.
Yeah,
that's
true.
I mean, that's just where we are. And the thing I think the takeaway here, and there's a few, but the interesting takeaway for me is this is exactly why the North Koreans don't want their people having technology. Because films get made, films get exported, films get seen around the world. And look, I have seen the size of these demonstrations in Iran, and they are massive.
Yeah.
They're massive. The Iranian regime has a problem, and they're only going to be able to solve that problem in a couple of different ways, right? Either they negotiate, which I can't imagine they're going to do, or they slaughter, which I could easily imagine them doing. And then if they do that, it'll either work or backfire. And I assume, given the size of the crowds, backfire is really a possibility. So I think the Iranian regime is on a very thin tightrope right now. And what they do in the next week or so going to be pretty definitive.
Yeah, it looks like the IRGC forces who are trying to, sort of push back the crowds. I mean, there's even a conciliatory tone on the part of the, I guess you call him the president, who is sort of the operational head, who's, I guess slightly
The
below the
COO,
supreme leader.
right?
Yeah. And he seems to be like, this is not Israel's fault. It's not the U.S.'s fault. This is our fault. We want to talk, which almost never comes out of Iranian power.
No.
But that's blood in the water for the
Mhm.
Iranian people at this point, who are now occupying whole cities, including Tehran, mind you. And wow, like, this is really on the cusp of being a 1979 reversal moment, along with the fact that it seems like this was completely endogenous. And I started the conversation with making this distinction between endogenous and exogenous. And I think it's really important for the legitimacy of this popular movement in Iran to be endogenous, especially as it can be a repudiation of some of the past, not only of the power structure that's been there since '79, but also more recently of United States foreign policy, which was basically, let's bribe the Iranians not to do nuclear weapons, and then have the money go to proxy terror cells all around the world, which backfired on Israel, the United States, and other places. What do you think? What do you think the future looks like if let's imagine the future if the popular uprising takes hold and they reinstall this constitutional monarchy? What does the future of Iran look like in that case, given that it is an endogenous movement?
I think it'd be pretty bright on
Yeah.
balance. Right. Now, look, every country has its problems. Iran is no different. And even if the political problem were solved tomorrow, there'd be all kinds of market problems that would have to get sorted out over time. But that's just it. They would get sorted out over time. The minute you remove the blockades, things tend to take care of themselves. This is one of the things that economists have been so good at over the years, is kind of internalizing the logic of Friedrich Hayek and spontaneous order, right? You just kind of take your hands off things and let them go, and life gets to parity pretty quickly. Now, how much bloodshed is there going to have to be before we get there? I don't know. Could things go horribly, horribly wrong if they brought a Shah back? Of course they could, right? There's a million things that could go wrong, but the only path for things to go well is to remove the theocracy. That's literally that is inescapable, right? And
I
anywhere
think
you
they know it
find
too. I think they know that
they
they can't turn
they
back
do.
now.
They do. And given that much less than half of them are religious in the first place, getting rid of a theocracy is not going to seem like that big a deal.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
some, it will be, right? And you're going to think of it like this. There are still, to this day, people in Russia who hanker for the Soviet Union,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're slowly dying off, but they're still there. And that's going to always be the case after a regime change. There will always be a sizable minority who would prefer to go back to what they just got rid of. And the only
Yeah.
way around that is pure time. So,
What does that strategic relationship between Russia and Iran look like if this happens? Because I know that they have been strange bedfellows, but nevertheless,
nevertheless,
cooperators
bedfellows.
at least.
And the answer to that question is going to get us to Venezuela pretty quickly, because what good did Russian air defenses do the nice people in Venezuela? And if you're lying in bed, saying the Russians will take care of our security needs, you've got more than one problem on your hands. And I think the world woke up to just how useless Russian military gear is given that the United States military was able to, let's just say, charitably extract Nicolas Maduro in 3 hours without a single loss of life or any loss of American military material.
Forgive this brief interruption, but I suspect you're here because you're disillusioned with legacy politics. If you're a creative, a builder, or an innovator, you might be ready to win funding. Through Human Respect Labs, you can get up to $30,000 to fund your next creative project. But not just any project. We're looking for 6 kinds of builders: video storytellers, community builders, writers, entrepreneurs, strategists, and innovators, any of which should be dedicated to human liberation. That means making government obsolete. Why? We know too much energy goes into politics, but not enough goes into real solutions. So if you're a freedom lover and you have a project idea that promotes peace, autonomy, and voluntary collaboration, we want to hear from you. Apply now at humanrespectlabs.org. That's humanrespectlabs.org. Criticize by creating. Right.
I mean,
Well, given that we have done that, we have now done that, and we can go back, we can skip around and go back to Iran if we want, but let's now travel to Venezuela on that note. We've got a Venezuela thing about which I have some mixed feelings.
Yeah, me too.
I never shed a tear when a terrible socialist dictator goes down. And in this case,
and we should be ice clear on this. Nicolas Maduro is a terrible human being who should have never have been near the corridors of power in any country on this globe, ever.
Right.
Most people don't know this. Do you know what? I'll give you a quiz. Do you have any idea what Nicolas Maduro's job was before he became political?
I know the answer to this. If I'm not mistaken, wasn't he a bus driver?
He was indeed a bus driver. He was indeed.
It's like, what do you expect? I mean, I guess Hugo Chavez hand selected him as his successor because he, was willing to be his enforcer, his strongman, whatever you want to call it.
Loyalty
but beyond
was what
that,
mattered,
it's like,
not competence.
Right. It's like, I'm willing to make the ends justify the means, to have and keep power.
And when you find loyalty trumping competence, you're going to go off a cliff sooner or later. And I say that as a warning to my fellow Americans, because loyalty is being prized far above competence in the present administration.
Well, and that makes me wonder it's like, okay, the United States military, what they were able to pull off was impressive. So at some level in the military rank and file, they can say at the very least, we're back, baby, right? They did an excellent job with what they set out to do and executing it. But it seems like on the political side, back in Washington, there's a WTF moment, is in, okay, now what, right?
Now what? Yeah, it's the dog that caught the car.
Yeah, now you got the car. What are you going to do with it? Seems like they're going to leave the number 2, this woman, is it Gonzalez, in place.
This is going to prove to be a gigantic problem. She's being left in place on the understanding that she will do as she is told. All right, I guess whoever ends up in control there is going to do as he or she is told, given the asymmetric power levels that you see between Venezuela and the United States. However, can she bring the thugs in her own group to heel? And the initial answer to that question seems to be no. That there are paramilitary groups right now running wild through Caracas, marauding, killing, stealing, doing all the things that groups like that tend to do. Are they going to be brought to heel? Can they be brought to heel? And I don't know what the answer to that question is. I suspect it's no.
Well, let's say that... Sorry, go ahead, please.
You see the difference in expectations between an internal revolt, as you see in Iran. And look, I'm not naive enough to think for one second the CIA and the Mossad aren't hip deep in that. Of course they are. But it's nonetheless an internal revolt versus an external power play, right? An internal revolt, if
I mean, in Iran
successful,
or in Venezuela?
in Iran, the internal revolt in Iran will be more successful than the external imposition of order in Venezuela. Now, I'm not saying that Iran will surely come out of this better off than Venezuela will. I'm not saying that at all. Just on balance, that's much more likely.
Yeah. So here's my concern. You have Maduro enabling for years terror cells and networks. Apparently, if it's true that he was being permissive about, for example, Hezbollah operating in there.
He was. He absolutely was.
Right. So let's just accept that as a stipulative backgrounder. Then you have narco traffickers who were complicit with him as well. They're going to be vying for power, and they're going to have muscle. So the terror cells are going to have muscle. The narco traffickers, some of whom compete over territory, I would guess, are going to vie for power. And then you're going to have sort of the underlings who are going to be jockeying for position, who are already in the Maduro administration or whatever the hell you want to call it. I frankly don't know. But presumably there was some sort of rank and file. You have high-level lieutenants. You have people who are what you might call the heads of the Hydra. And they've left this woman in place, and I still don't understand the wisdom in that. I guess because maybe they are really trying to do this in a legal way, with the pretext that this was a police action, and they were really just removing this dictator who had broken American law, right? So they could not have to declare war and tell Congress. I want to go back to that in a moment, by the way, our behavior in this, or specifically the Trump administration. But with this jockeying for power in Venezuela, and you have this sort of liberal Democrat liberal Democrat is in someone who supports basic liberal democracy, right? You know, I don't know the extent to which she is a capitalist or, socialist light or whatever, but pretty much she wanted a liberated Venezuela, never liked the Chavistas, and is, to my mind, a really good candidate for stepping into this position, having just won the Nobel Prize, even if she's a figurehead. But that doesn't look like it's going to happen. So now you've got this socialist, and I hate to say it, but she's likely to be, an unhappy puppet, and time passes and she gets sneaky, or somebody overtakes her power or something like that, and we got it all over again. Mm-hmm. Or we've got, but we don't want to get into a situation like Iraq where we're trying to do nation building or install some sort of interim government where we send a bunch of fucking technical assistants from the United States to run the place, because we've demonstrated over and over again that we're no good at that. So what then?
Well, let's be clear. Nobody's any good at that.
Right.
That's not the kind of thing that can be done. And I'll just give you a quick story here. I remember when I got to Iraq, I didn't know the customs, the language, and I had no friends. I just got dumped. Some guy picked me up at the airport, dropped me off at an empty apartment, and I was on my own. And because I was hired as dean, I got there a month before the faculty got there, so I had to learn everything on my own. And as I drifted around and talked to people the way you do, it took me 3 weeks. And I mean this literally. It literally took me 3 weeks to learn enough that I knew for a fact that nation building was never going to work there, ever. So my question was, why didn't somebody from the Bush administration go live there for 3 weeks prior to engaging in this adventure of a lifetime, which is still paying dividends, right? And we're looking at the same kind of thing, I think, in Venezuela. I'm on the outside looking in. I've never been to Venezuela. I don't know Venezuelan culture, but I know a power vacuum when I see one. And we've got a power vacuum there right now. You raise the possibility of bringing the Nobel laureate in. I think that's a perfectly reasonable possibility, given that I don't know enough to have an opinion. But why not bring the
Likewise.
guy in who theoretically, who by almost every account beat
Won the
Maduro in the
election.
last election quite handily?
Right.
Wouldn't he be a good option? But apparently he wasn't considered either.
Well, I wonder about that too, because if the woman who was I think the number two or some sort of lieutenant of Maduro is a socialist, and was therefore part of his illegitimate administration, if we accept, and I think we should, that the last election was a sham and that Maduro didn't win, why wouldn't you just put in place the person that the people chose?
That was my
Again,
first question. And the only answer from a perspective of American wishes would be that he wouldn't be controllable enough, or that he wouldn't be able to seize the machinery of the Maduro state. Either way, it's a non-starter. So,
uh,
we're left with a lot of bad options. And I'm pretty confident predicting now with the little that I know. And what I know could fill a thimble, right, compared to the ocean of information that's out there. I can't see a way in hell this doesn't equal American boots on the ground in Venezuela before long. Can't see a
yeah,
way it doesn't, because that's always what happens when people decide to cut the head off of a regime and rebuild it from outside. Turns
right.
out you can't. Turns
No,
out you
no,
can't.
these things are, it's like a
So
Hayekian
you'll first,
spontaneous order, right? These
I mean,
things, even the most illegitimate regimes evolve and emerge through time,
right.
building on sort of path dependencies that originate in a kind of rootedness. They can be corrupt roots or not, but they're still roots. And the idea that you can sort of plan or fashion in some sort of machine or puzzle like fashion some new state of affairs is just it's just nuts.
It's
It doesn't take
crazy.
into
And
account the culture, it doesn't take into account the incentives, the dynamics, the mindset of the people.
culture is the answer. Culture is prior to politics in every instance. So unless you understand and build on the culture, and think of the United States as the perfect example, right? Um, do states matter in the United States? Well, they always have. That's why we have a Senate, right? And that's why each state gets an equal vote to every other state. California to Rhode Island, the same. That's part of American culture. From an external perspective, that makes no sense. From an internal perspective, it makes perfect sense. What are all the things about Venezuela that we don't know, or more appropriately, Donald Trump doesn't know? Because I'm guessing the CIA knows everything they need to know. I'm also guessing that Donald Trump doesn't listen to them when they tell him things he doesn't want to hear, because that's
Right.
his behavior. Now, what's going to end up happening there, I don't know, but I would bet a lot of things that first we'll see peacekeepers show up, and
Oh
then
Lord.
the peacekeepers we send will be unable to keep the peace given their small numbers, so we'll increase the numbers. And then you see how this goes, right? It looks exactly the same as the early days of Iraq, but how could it be
Right.
anything else? And I
Until
don't see
finally you're
nonsense
having
like
to do
this
a
happening in
surge.
Iran. Let's hope it doesn't get that bad.
I hope not. And look,
But
I know that the people have felt in Iran, and going back to Iran, the people have felt emboldened by hearing that Donald Trump has their back and that the United
mhm,
States military power will be projected and brought to bear in their country if there are too many more murders of the population, right? If they
yeah,
harm the
I wonder.
protesters.
I wonder.
One does wonder because sometimes Trump just talks out of his ass. But that so there is a sense that they believe that and that is emboldening them. And I think that that message needed to have been sent one way or the other.
One way or
Although
the other.
although the interventionism part we should talk about next is
Well,
is a problem because
there's a fly in the ointment here too, Max, because Donald Trump announced that the strikes that the United States undertook against Iran had decimated their nuclear program. And that's not true at all. It set it back by all accounts a couple of months.
hmm,
So there's still this problem below the surface, which would be a perfect justification for the imposition of American force if it seemed like there was a tipping point that one last strike could push over. So be ready for
yeah.
that. Be ready for that.
Yeah, and to me there is an air of legitimacy and of groundswell of popular dissent against the mullahs and against the Iranian regime, current regime, Islamist regime, that you won't have if we start meddling again and playing world police. It loses that at least veneer of credibility
I think,
among the Iranian people, particularly as it's been so underreported in the West. And I can imagine that they're going to want to spin it as, okay, this is Iraq 2.0. It's what the neocons have always wanted, blah, blah, blah. And they might not be half wrong in this case.
well, they might be more than half wrong, but not completely wrong.
Yeah.
It's interesting, right? Because when you look at Venezuela, the population there isn't all that big, and a very significant chunk of their population is left. Right? They've gone to Colombia and they've come to the United States. And what do you see the Trump administration doing now? Scolding Colombia about what they have to do. Obviously, the lesson here is clear. You're next. But when you look at Iran, those people haven't really been able to leave. So most of your opposition is still among you there, which is another kind of notch in favor of the Iranians, that maybe it works better there than Venezuela. No matter how you cut this, Max, you're looking at internal and external forces, each of these countries, which are very, very different. And I don't know how much they can be compared.
And that endogenous versus exogenous overthrow distinction, I think, is really important, both for the optics and to the external world in both cases. In terms of legitimacy and so on, it's like you can't really say anything to the Iranians based on what they decide to do. Of course, you don't want, some other terrible Hydra head to emerge there and, gain possession of a nuclear weapons program that is, only now 2 months behind. Yet at the same time, um, that's not very likely, I don't think, in this case, because the popular psychology in Iran, at least according to, again, this sort of dubious and dubious dissident media that's coming out of the expat Iranians, is says that they basically want the Shah, they want the constitutional monarchy, they don't want the Islamist dictatorship. And so, repairing and figuring out what's going on economically and all that stuff's going to take time. They're going to have to get through their time, just as the Russia did after, 1991, after everything turned to shit economically for them. And it took a good decade before they started to climb out of it. That may happen for the Iranians too, but at least they have legitimacy, some time. Whereas
It
in
would be,
Venezuela, that's not clear how they're going to be able to put back together some sort of market economy, restore property rights, that sort of thing, and really stave off all these bad actors that are still milling around in the country.
yeah, and they've tasted real power. They still have real power. They won't give that up willingly.
Right.
So there's your
Right.
problem. Nobody ever gives up power willingly. And that's
Yeah.
a problem in Iran as well, right? That's always the problem. I like Iran's chances more in the near term than I like Venezuela's chances. With Venezuela's oil reserves, I like their chances in the long term over almost everybody. Right? If they just do what nature has given them to do, they will be beyond wealthy. And that will be the salve that soothes all wounds. So
Yeah.
long term, I like Venezuela. Shorter term, I like Iran. I think ultimately they'll both go the right way. It's just how long will it take and at what cost?
My kids ask me what I do for work, and I say, I write, talk into a microphone, and hope people send money. Now I'm questioning my life choices, but the kids gotta eat, and we have bureaucracies to topple. Support our work at underthrow.org, and for less than $5 a month, you'll help me rouse the rabble. Wait, what's underthrow? If overthrow is violent, underthrow is peaceful yet powerful. Real change doesn't start in Washington. Casting your vote with millions is like crying a teardrop into the ocean. Instead, we build consent-based communities that make traditional power structures obsolete. Left, right, or center, it doesn't matter. What matters is creating options for opting out and opting in. We build parallel systems in which people thrive, then just leave the old systems behind. It's about choosing communities, not imposing them. So, support the show, feed my kids, read the newsletter, and discover why most subversive acts amount to building a better civilization together. Visit underthrow.org. Right, right.
And the thing,
So,
the lesson here, Max, and there is a lesson here. If you believe anything anybody tells you just because you agree with them, you've been had. You shouldn't
that's
believe
right.
dissident media when it furthers your own narrative. You shouldn't believe state media when it furthers your own narrative. You should probably go out and verify as much as you can.
Well, and there just hasn't been that many sources on the matter except for the dissident media and Israelis who are, to be fair,
You're gonna believe
Israelis have
them.
a
You're gonna believe them too. I mean, come on, it's the same
no,
story.
no, absolutely not. And that doesn't mean I'm anti-Israel. It just means that they have a very deep interest in seeing this happen. There is a long-standing cultural connection between the Persians and the Israelis that goes back to Cyrus the Great, right?
Yeah,
And that
I'm
cultural
not
connection,
anti-Israel either. Not by a long shot. I just know that the media will lie to you, and it
sure,
will lie to
yeah,
you repeatedly.
and so for me, what I've thought to do is keep my eyes open, keep my ear to the ground, see what everybody's saying, and try to work out some sort of, I guess you could call it a best um, Bayesian guess as to what's going
Yeah,
on and what's likely to happen.
and you'll know by the size of the demonstrations.
Well, that's been promising.
Do they get bigger? Well, they have been. Are they being fired upon? No, not so much.
One
That's
gruesome
interesting.
metric that someone mentioned yesterday, I think, or yeah, I'm pretty sure it was yesterday, was by now in some of the past protests that had gone on in Iran, there had been 1,000 people killed. There's been less than 100 killed this time.
Interesting.
And that is a gruesome metric, but it's like numbers of bodies in the streets relative to the number of people killed is a different proportion, and we have to take that very seriously.
I think that's exactly right.
Yeah. Now let's do something. I want to put a pin in the idea of, okay, we're dealing with Marco Rubio, who has a bone to pick with Cuba, right? So I want to return to
Mm.
Cuba in a moment. But first, I want to keep with Venezuela and discuss the justification, the rationale for doing what the Trump administration did in terms of morality, legality,
Well,
world opinion, and the rest of it. What's your
let
take?
me let me start with a very interesting comparison. When we sent a bunch of bombers and troops on the ground into Venezuela, that was not war. That was, according to the Trump administration, an extension of the American criminal justice system. But, and let's just stipulate that almost none of what I'm about to say is true. But when the Venezuelans were shipping lots and lots of fentanyl to the United States, they produced no fentanyl at all, but work with me here for a minute. And that was an act of war. So shipping drugs to people who want to buy them is an act of war. Bombing a country and extracting its president, that's more like what happens on the Andy Griffith Show. I think we're dealing with maybe multiple definitions that are incongruous at best. So, does the Trump administration have the authority to do this? Well, they did it, and there you go. Did Barack Obama have the authority to literally murder United States citizens abroad with drone strikes? Well, he did it, so there you go.
Right.
Did George W. Bush have the right, the constitutional authority to invade Iraq? He did it. At least in that instance, we can say Congress allowed it to happen.
Sure.
Congress was consulted. I think W. Bush has a much stronger case than literally everybody else since Korea, maybe.
So if you have a limited surgical strike and it doesn't rise to the level of invoking some sort of war provision in the Constitution, right?
Yeah. Right.
Okay. Which nobody since Vietnam, I mean, I think there have been 3 consultations with Congress on some sort of military action overseas since Vietnam out of probably almost 20.
Most of your listeners are going to know this, but most Americans don't. The last declared war we had was World War II. That's the last time we declared war on anybody. Everything else has been a police action of one sort or another, even if it lasted, 15, 20 years, 30 years. I mean, it's hard to take this nonsense seriously at this point. The Constitution vests the war-making power with Congress, in Congress, period. Hard stop. It then appoints the president as commander-in-chief. But these are 2 different roles. And the commander-in-chief role, as the founders understood it, was largely to repel invasion in real time. The English come in 1812. Do you really want Congress to have to convene before we instruct our military to go fight? Well, that would be stupid. That would just be stupid. But this isn't that. We're not being invaded. All the nonsensical administration talk about the invasion of drugs to the contrary. We're not being invaded by anything we don't want.
Yeah.
So,
and it's probably
here we are.
cocaine and not fentanyl, which I think is a huge difference.
From Venezuela, it's cocaine. Of course it is. There's no fentanyl.
But even
fentanyl
still,
comes from China.
That's weak. And there's
fentanyl
a lot
comes
more
from China through Mexico
Colombia
into the United States. That's it.
Yeah.
And, when you start looking at present, when Truman was asked, who's in charge of foreign policy? Because, every president is deeply frustrated domestically. They can never get anything done, right? Which is why we still haven't fixed Social Security, in case you haven't noticed. Everybody's known for, 30, 40 years that this is an existential threat, and yet nobody can fix it. So when Truman was asked who's in charge of foreign policy, he looked up and said, I am. Take it easy there, Harry. Take a deep breath. Constitutionally, that's incorrect. But the American people will let a president get away with foreign adventures well before they'll let him do anything they don't like in the least domestically. And presidents have taken that message to heart. And every president I could name, the first thing you would think about is who he bombed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So, see,
that,
I have a lot of mixed feelings about it. Look, I don't go as far as sort of the sanctimonious libertarians, or certainly the I mean, gosh, the left is there. I don't want to engage in tu quoque, but actually allow me to do so for a second. There's nothing more irritating to listen to than people on the left when it comes to immigration said nothing while the deporter in chief quietly sent all these people out of the country, namely Barack Obama,
mhm.
or when he did extra judicial drone strikes of American citizens, didn't declare war in his military adventures in Libya and Syria. The list goes on and on.
Yemen.
And they said they did not say anything about it. I mean, nothing. It was dead silence. Only the principled libertarians were out there going, this is wrong. This is unconstitutional. We need to declare war, even though there is sort of this de facto precedent of nobody declaring war anymore.
Yep.
And it looks like the president has the power to do it, whether you like it or not. And there's no way to stop it. So then what? So now we're in a similar situation. And of course,
Well,
I,
let me make this example even a little worse, if you don't mind.
okay.
The American left right now is having a collective bowel movement about how we put a bounty on Nicolas Maduro, $50 million. And it was obvious that somebody from inside took the U.S. up on that. We knew exactly where he was going to be. We knew exactly where all of his defenses were. This was an inside job. The 50 million made it happen. So is Donald Trump a horrible person for putting a $50 million bounty on Nicolas Maduro's head? Because if he is, tell me about the $25 million bounty that Joe Biden put on his head.
Right. And of course, the principled libertarians are going to say, but my tax dollars shouldn't go to that. Shouldn't go to undeclared, Congress should declare war. My tax dollars shouldn't go into anything that Congress doesn't declare war on. And I'm principally anti-war anyway. And
I'm sympathetic.
I share that sympathies with that too, particularly as the more we allow authorities to build in this apparatus of control and acting with impunity in so many ways. We've done to the not we, the powerful have done to the Constitution what Thomas Jefferson did to the Bible, which is cut out shit that they don't like and discard it and just leave the rest, right? And I love Jefferson, and I know you do too. So I don't
I
want to
do.
pick on Jefferson too much. But the point is, it's like we don't have a Ninth and 10th Amendment anymore. Those are just dead
You
amendments.
might legitimately say we never did.
Yeah, yeah. And now the way we go to war is now completely outside of the Constitution. We spent 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan, plus more than that, and there was never any war declared. So we have this
Look,
constitutional
Max,
problem, and yet there's at some level it's like just let me savor this moment watching Maduro do the perp walk, because he was such a shitbag.
yes, and look, what more do you need to see than the people celebrating what's happened? I watched, in real time, some video of people in Venezuela, and they were pretty thrilled. Now, it's falling apart now, and the people who had their hands on the levers of power are reasserting their grip, but of course they are. Let's get back to your main point here, though. The constitutionality of these sorts of things and whether we should get all exercised about it. And I think the short answer is yes, of course we should. The longer answer is a lot more complicated, because I am a thoroughgoing constitutionalist. Thoroughgoing. I think the American Constitution, the United States Constitution, is the finest political document, apart from the Declaration of Independence, ever written by a collection of men. If I were president and I could have made the Louisiana Purchase, I would have. It was unconstitutional, but I would have done it because it was the right and smart thing to do. If I were president in 1860 and the South seceded before I even took office, would I have let them secede? I like to think I might have, because that's the constitutional answer. But I might not have. I might have done exactly the same thing Lincoln did. Might have. And look, I'm big enough to admit that. My values fall into conflict in certain moments. And
This
I don't know what to
tension
do about
between-
that any more than anybody else does.
Well, and exactly. It's sort of like there is legitimacy, which means literally from the law. Is this legal or not? And my abstract sense of justice. My abstract theory of justice is, everybody thinks their abstract theory of justice is grounded in ultimate morality and should be respected and reflected in the law. But it almost never is.
Define it for me, would you? Because Plato wrote a book called The Republic. It's literally this thick. And with the sole purpose of defining justice. And at the end of the book, couldn't do it. John Rawls came around with a theory of justice, not the theory, a theory of justice. His book was twice as long, and it failed. So I'm pretty sure that when people start yammering on about justice,
what does it look like in terms of implementation? Is that what you're saying? It should be implemented to be successful? Because
define it for me, right? Nobody can define justice.
Right. No, I'm not disagreeing with you on that. I'm just saying that everybody intuitively thinks their conception of justice is okay. Otherwise, we wouldn't speak out against the government, what it does, and the laws it passes.
But
we
they
all have
can't
a
involve
conception of
themselves
justice that we think is great.
But they can't involve themselves in the giving of reasons, right? So your feeling that justice is what you think it is, that's nonsense. It doesn't matter. Unless you can define it and defend it, fuck off. I mean, just fuck off. And when you finally come to realize that, I'll go all the way back to Plato's Republic. Thrasymachus, one of the famous characters there, said that justice is the will of the stronger, period. Whatever the stronger person says justice is, that's what justice is. And I think that's the world we actually live in. I think we should aspire to live in a different world. But I think that's the world we live in.
Does this go back to Thrasymachus is the Melian debates, right?
It's in I think book one of the Republic.
The basic idea is the Athenians came along to this tiny little island and said, "We're going to take you over." And I think it was, I forgot the name of the island. Forgive me, but the folks on this little tiny island said, "But that would be unjust. We haven't caused any trouble. Why would you take us over? We haven't done anything wrong. We haven't done anything to hurt you. And we're just here trying to live our own lives, blah, blah, blah." And basically Athens said, because we can.
Maduro said, "I want to meet with President Trump to work out these difficulties." And he was met by silence. So, yeah, okay. He wanted to retain power. He knew he was about to lose it. He knew the only way he could keep it is to kiss the presidential ass. And the presidential ass was unavailable for kissing. Well, I mean, look, that's just how it is. And you start to realize that all the talk of justice, well, that's great, but I don't think anybody actually cares about it.
The world speaks in riddles, markets, politics, power, the very nature of consciousness itself. But what if there were guides, a secret fellowship dedicated to reading the signs, to building bridges between the seen and the unseen? The gray robes operate in the space others fear or cannot comprehend. We map the territory between spiritual awakening and practical revolution, between ancient wisdom and radical innovation. 12 dimensions guide us. One mission impels us. Find out more at grayrobes.org. That's grayrobes, Well, the
I mean,
reason I say
I think
that,
a few people do, but those in power don't.
no, they certainly don't. And I think this is why we have an imperial America now that is going down the shitter in terms of debt and inflation. Very soon we're going to run into some serious problems, probably not to the degree that Iran or Venezuela might, but we're still going to have some very serious problems we're going to have to contend with in the future, all because of the military industrial complex, the adventurism, where instead of being, maintaining a defensive posture, maintaining, well-trained force that is able to defend our borders and intervene only in very, unique circumstances, we've basically been trying to play world police. And what it created after World War II is this sense that almost not to the same degree, but our enemies turned us into everything we hated, um, by turning us into this welfare warfare state. And it just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's relied on debt spending. And there is a pragmatism to the counter case to, such extensive military adventurism. But there's also, I think, a very pragmatic case that, maintaining and, the sort of anti-globalist Trump voter types, who like to shout globalism at every turn, should realize that there's a big difference between globalization and globalism.
That's right. And
Globalization
they don't.
is right. But, to the extent that any of them is listening, globalization is trade between people across borders, right? Among countries. It's made the whole world very wealthy in the last 40 years.
It's what gives you bananas on your table in your kitchen.
And coffee.
And coffee. Cheap coffee, too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I
remember the days.
don't take away my coffee and tea. I mean, you could go on and on. There's, great devices from, all over Asia that, we buy for dirt cheap televisions, cell phones, you name it. Now, the idea here for the protectionist is that we should repatriate that and have these domestic industries. It makes us vulnerable when we don't. Okay, there's some arguments to be made there. I don't necessarily agree with them, but from a pragmatic standpoint, you might be able to persuade some folks that that's important, and I understand that. But in terms of principle of I should be able to trade with whomever I like as long as they're not threatening harm to me, and arguably China could be an exception to that. I don't know. We could talk about that too. But at the end of the day, lowering trade barriers is usually a better thing to do overall. And it's not a perfect system in terms of, the migration of domestic industries overseas. We've seen a hollowing out of the Rust Belt and so on. I agree with that to some degree. But the really big problematic thing that I see, and I agree with the Trumpkins on, or the Trump supporters on, is globalism, this tendency for power to accrete in these completely unaccountable institutions like the UN, like the EU, like the IMF and World Bank. You name it, they're out there, and even some of the NGOs that are part of these power networks, like the WEF or World Economic Forum. These kind of institutions, I don't trust them. They're unaccountable, and I largely agree that they do more harm than good in terms of existing at all. If, as far as I'm concerned, if you just got rid of the UN tomorrow, it wouldn't make a damn bit of difference
Wouldn't
to
make
much
any
of
difference at all.
Yeah. Um, and yet something like the EU, I think, has grown and turned into a cancer on the backs of the European nation states.
They're figuring that out.
Yeah. And we may see the dissolution of the EU in the next, 10, 20 years. But
I can't see a way you don't.
I don't either.
Or
But,
at the very least, all the rich countries will exit. they're subsidizing all the poor countries, and that won't last forever.
Well, and the Germans are having a very hard time right now
Yeah.
economically, and they were a
Well,
powerhouse once, but
and look,
anyway,
they
there's a
made a
lot of
terrible
cool.
mistake. They made two terrible mistakes. They joined the EU, and then they decided to upend their energy sector. Now they have to
Yes.
get all their energy from the Russians.
And the third
Well,
mistake
what
was
could
letting in all of the developing
well
world
yeah,
immigrants.
what could possibly go wrong after these decisions? And look,
Right.
this is the lesson of politics, right? You get lousy decisions for a long time before you get any kind of recursion to the mean. Things get out of hand, and they stay out of hand until they drift back. And when they drift back too far. And then you get
Yeah.
nonsense from the other side. And, that's what we're experiencing in this country right now. It's a
Yeah,
recursion to the
and
mean that drifted right past the mean, and now we're all the way out in right field. And even the terms right and left have lost all meaning in the United States at this point.
yeah, we're really functioning. I mean, the Nolan chart is also losing all meaning. But
That's a good idea.
essentially, it's one axis is left to right, where left and right are defined in very strange terms, which is if you're on the Nolan chart, if you're left, you are for no economic freedom, but all personal freedoms. And of course, that is no longer the case on the left at all. And then for the right, you're all into economic freedom, complete economic freedom, but no personal freedoms. So that's not true either. You have to start mapping our left and right, what we intuitively think of as left and right, closer and closer to the bottom of the other axis, which is high degree of personal economic freedom, or high degree of freedom, libertarian, and authoritarian, which is complete like the northern pole, if you like, would be complete personal and economic freedom, and the southern pole would be neither of those things, complete totalitarian control. That is what we're seeing, is a drift of both parties towards that pole. And I don't think people fully appreciate how much this is happening in the popular psychology, because the left and right is in this acrimonious combat to try to dominate the other. And this
Yeah,
domination game causes the
as
drift.
long as people perceive of themselves as members of a team in this fight, they will not see what the fight is actually about.
Indeed. Indeed. James Harrigan, I could talk to you for another hour, but we've reached
Well,
the end of our
next
time.
time, I'm going to give you an
Yeah.
idea, Max, because I would like to talk about Dwight Eisenhower's farewell speech in 1960, when he
Oh God, it's a
said,
brilliant, brilliant document.
"Watch out for the military-industrial complex. That will be the end of you people." Turns out Ike was a psychic.
Ike was a psychic, because it was
He,
already
predi-
started.
he predicted the future better than Nostradamus did, that's for sure.
The
So,
only thing
just
I
throwing
would
it out there
compare,
as a possibility.
hey, let's do it. Let's dog ear that for another episode. You come back on the show and be our guest. And I would say the closest other thing is Robert Yates, Brutus I, and the Anti-Federalist Papers.
Yeah. The Anti-Federalists generally had all the best arguments about the Constitution. They took a look at the proposed Constitution and knew exactly what was going to go wrong. They were incorrect on a couple of things, like a standing army didn't prove to be an internal problem the way they said it was going to, for example. But they got almost everything right. Their problem was they didn't have anything to offer in return. So when Brutus, and I think Brutus was the best of them, when he said these are the things wrong with the federal constitution that's under consideration, he didn't say, and here's a better constitution that you should vote for instead. The Anti-Federalists were not a unified front the way the Federalists were.
There's a lesson here for partisans and coalitions of all sides and all stripes. You got to have, along with your critique, you have to have a positive vision.
Answer. The Anti-Federalists were so bad at this part of the game that they allowed the Federalists to name them anti-Federalists. Not a one of them was anti-Federalist. They were all Federalists. It was just the kind of federalism they wanted. And when you let your enemy name you, you have already lost.
You can't name. Yeah, I mean, well, again, I could go on all day talking to you, but I remember one time trying to say something in marketing copy about anti-authoritarians, and someone said, "As soon as you say anti, you toast." Like I want to present myself as an anti-authoritarian. Well, it
That's
seems
not going to work.
intuitively right to me, but when you say anti, it means you're not for anything.
I am an anti-authoritarian. You could tell by the tens of thousands of people that follow me into the streets every day.
James Harrigan, thank you very much, sir. Thank you for joining me today
Always my
on this
pleasure, Max.
last-minute episode.
Always my pleasure.